Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Hello, and welcome to the Building Innovation podcast, where we convene subject matter experts to support advances in building science and technology. I'm your host, Johnny Fortune, and I am so excited today to be joined by J.C. Hudgison. J.C., welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So many people may know you, but for those that don't, you are a building official, right, for the city of Tampa, Florida.
Correct. I've been the building official in the city of Tampa since 2020. Prior to that, I was the building official in Columbus, Georgia from 2016 to 2020.
So it's always interesting to get different perspectives, and I think, will be the first time we've had a building official on our podcast, and really I personally have not had a lot of conversations outside of my 20 years in the industry, with working with building officials on particular projects. But I'm glad that you're here, and we had an opportunity to connect at the Building Innovation Conference and talk for a few minutes. And I'm so glad you're here because you bring a great perspective and can highlight the importance of that role and what's happening on that front for digital transformation. I've often heard about that, like a lot of the innovations that the industry wants to do. At the end of the day, it's still got to go through the permitting process and the approval process. So I'm very eager to hear your perspective on digital transformation, what you've been seeing and what you're planning. So let's jump right in. So tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and in regards to, like digital transformation and what's happening with you.
So for us, most of what we do is to the permitting process. So whether it's the intake, our staff taking in the permits, our plan review, our staff reviewing the permits, and then our inspectors making sure that those permits match the plans and what's being constructed is what was originally designed and approved. A part of the digital transformation for us really came dealing with, going probably through the pandemic. It was like, hey, we used to do paper plans. So you used to submit 3 sets of rolls and bring them to your office, and you had to figure out how to handle that. And we really had to get used to this new normal, that contactless situation where it was like, well, I could upload a set of plans, and for you to provide the proper plan review. In Georgia, I kind of dealt with that at the front end of the pandemic, kind of dealing with that transition because we weren't there and we kind of got caught off guard as how do we do this and how do we handle it. I was definitely in a better situation here in Tampa where we had already integrated a lot of the digital technologies. So then it made it easier. It's like, hey, this is just, process is normal. It was like, hey, if you're going to upload plans, all right, we'll use our permitting system, upload the plans and go from there. So it's really been a good transition to be able to use that. So then I already have that base. So any new technologies or anything we want to bring into the building environment, I'm not having to feel like starting all the way at ground zero. Like I can move up. I'm on a higher level to be able to do better things.
Yeah. And you shared with me some of your history, that you do a lot of review, both from like floodplain and health, safety, welfare, and that you are a certified floodplain manager. Is that right? Or am I getting that right?
That's a recent title for me as well. Once again, moving from Georgia, coming to Florida, and in the city of Tampa, almost 1/3 of our parcels are flood averse. There's some type of hazard that may be mitigated, whether it's height, whether it's a VE zone, those different types of things dealing with floodplain management. So for me, I had to learn that side of the house. I had to learn how to integrate that in the building department because we were looking at both of those things concurrently. It wasn't like, okay, well, you go see another department and then you come see us. It was like, no, you look at it all together. So our one-stop shop does help that. And so for me, I had to learn that extra expertise to understand the floodplain management, building above DFE, and then being able to roll that into the building code and the requirements for the building code.
And as a Floridian myself, I can appreciate the need for that. Although I'm in a different part of Florida than you, but definitely storm surge, hurricane activity, always huge concerns for the resilience of our communities here. Thank you for your work you're doing I want to move to now. What's the policy perspective? As so, you have not only a policy perspective, but you have a user perspective, and some of your history. How did you actually get involved in the industry to start with?
So that's always an interesting story. Everyone says the building officials. No, I don't know many people wake up and say, "Hey, I want to be a building official when I grow up." So, what happened? I originally my degrees in architecture from the University of Tennessee. Once I graduated there, I worked for a architecture firm in Columbus, Georgia, my hometown. Unfortunately, 2008, 2009, the recession hit, and it's like, hey, I'm going to have to find another line of work. At that time, the stimulus money was being moved to the cities. The cities had the Tiger funds and those funds to be able to do public improvement projects. And the city of Columbus said, "Hey, we need somebody to be an owner's rep. We need somebody to help manage these projects, to help the project management side of the house as we're receiving these millions of dollars, and we can't really spend it because we don't have staff that can assess it and know what to do." So I came on as a project manager for the city of Columbus, and that's kind of how I got my toe into the public sphere, moving from private to public. And so I did that for about 6 years. So from $32 million natatorium, citizen service center, several fire stations, our local Riverwalk when I was in Columbus, and so I moved from there and got promoted to the building official. Um, Kind of walking in there, and I have people I'm now managing that are 2 times my age was another another level to understand and come to grips with, to be able to work with staff. But and then moving to that side so I could kind of re-engage a lot of my architecture, because that's on now I'm back on the private side. It's like, hey, these new buildings, these new structures, houses, townhomes are coming online, and I could use some of that design to really help on the private side. And so a lot of the architects kind of appreciate that. They're like, man, you went to architecture school, so you get scope creep, you get all these things
Yeah.
that the owners are throwing stuff at you left, right, and center, and you're just trying to put it on a set of plans and get it to the city. So understanding that as well, and just trying to understand that balance between, especially as a building official, the rigidness of the code, understanding that there are certain things that you have to meet, but there may be some performance places where you can kind of work with that design team to find the best way forward to get a project complete. And so trying to find that best balance between the building code and economic development, because every building that's coming online, that's a new house for someone. Every new business is opening up. That's a new small business. That's a new company. That's a company moving to your region that has not been there before. So providing, kind of understanding that we're part of that bigger picture is really important.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you haven't stopped there. You recently completed your master's of public administration, right?
Yes. So just this spring, I finished with Troy University Online with my master's in public administration. So as much as I am this end user, it's like, hey, I'm but understanding the policy making, understanding the budgeting, getting into the ethics, getting to administrative law, learning all of those different pieces and the mechanisms of government is very important. In my role, because then once again reinforcing that bigger picture, it's like, hey, I'm the building official, yes, I'm a part of this process, but ideally understanding that, hey, working with this affordable housing project now will bring affordable housing here, which then will have a cascade effect on other things in our community. Now you've got a base of people, and that'll also benefit the commercial projects that are around, that mom and pop store that's around the corner. So it's understanding like how all of those pieces come together. And so being able to really internalize that, I could kind of cheat, because in my grad school, I could really lend on experiences I learned being a manager,
Yeah.
HR decisions I've had to make, and things like that. So it's really good to put those in perspective, to be able to kind of take those knowledges and take those experiences and really turn them into something special, and turn them into papers and projects to say, hey, I guess I do know what I'm doing. I do
Yeah.
I do figure. I guess I have figured this stuff out. So.
Well, yeah, and it's always a little tougher. I think for most people, at least, to go back and pursue an additional degree. So, yeah, hats off to you. That's a lot of work and effort, and congratulations on this huge achievement in your career and life. So you also have been very much involved in NIBS, which
Mhm.
is you're on the NIBS podcast, so we always like to draw that connection. How you're involved in NIBS, and you're one of our NIBS board of directors. So thank you for your service there. But what a lot of people may not know is that many of our board members are that they're not just a board member, they're involved in other ways. And you have some ties to our multi-hazard mitigation council, as well as our off-site construction council.
Yeah, so it's on the Offsite Construction Council, as I told you, being that end user, understanding that where can we find these benefits of offsite construction? How can that benefit our jurisdictions? How can it benefit our state, our city? So being able to really pull some of these policies down and use them. So I've definitely been glad to be a part of the process as being the board liaison to that board. To kind of get that insight. We're working on a next level of the best practices because, that was one of the things I brought up. I'm like, hey, this is great. This is working out in California. Can I use this in Florida? What can I use? What can I pull out of that to use to Florida? So we're working at, developing best practices to try to be able to share it across the country, whichever jurisdiction you're in, to say, hey, these may be offsite procedures and things that you can use in your jurisdiction that may benefit you. As you mentioned on the multi-hazard mitigation council, obviously, once again, as we mentioned, being Floridians, being in Florida, understanding that these hazards are important to be aware of and to understand what can we do to design better new technologies that can benefit us in the long run and for our resiliency. Because obviously, hurricane season, we're here from June to the end of November. We're in the midst of it. We just had a storm pass through just this weekend with Debbie kind of come up the Gulf on us. And it was like, we see 45 mile an hour winds, and it's like, okay, we're all right. But it's funny. My son even reached out. My son was like, Dad, you make sure these buildings are built to be stronger than that, right? And I
Yeah.
say, yes, that is my job. Like, so my son just goes back in his room, starts playing on his video games, and keeps moving because he's like, hey, my dad, that's his job to make sure these buildings are being built. We're not going to be worried about things like that. So dealing with the mitigation council is just good to be able to hear that conversation and see where those potential policies are going, because like I said, me as the building official ended up adopting these policies or their state mandates and things like that to be able to, understand, have a better knowledge of how these things are being developed.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about the councils of NIBS is there really is that opportunity to share knowledge, learn from each other, collaborate with each other, and what we have observed, over the last decade plus, that we're starting to see some of these hazards that are happening in places where it's not as expected, flooding in areas that are not necessarily prone to flooding. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is interesting. The councils are a way that people can share knowledge, support each other, and then adopt best practices from others in the industry. So you were telling me you originally got connected with NIBS through a survey sometime back, many years back. They went out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so back in 2016, I believe, I received an email from, I guess it was ICC as well as NIBS, about the future of the code official. Just understanding as a building official, your average age, what do you like about the job? What do you feel are challenges? And that was really my first time dealing with NIBS at that level. The report got released, I believe, in 2017, and so it was like, okay. And as we were talking about this and my connection to NIBS, I was like, let me see if I can find that report, and digging that up and finding some of those things that I contributed to that. I was a part of the report. I did the survey. I filled it out. I went through the information back in 2016 when I was still in Columbus. So it was really cool to kind of put that piece together to say, hey, NIBS, I didn't, I wasn't as involved in NIBS as I am now, but back then, understanding that NIBS is doing that outreach and trying to find information to provide that information to other thought bases and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, so shameless plug moment. So to all of our listeners, when you get a survey from NIBS, absolutely, you never know where it's going to lead or how you're going to get connected or the people you're going to get connected to. So yeah, that's just a fantastic story. So JC, let's talk about some housing affordability and some of the challenges there. What's your take on what's happening in that realm?
So once again, from the building official side, we hear these projects are coming. We hear affordable housing. We see these projects are coming, and a lot of times when we talk to the contractors, is right now, especially with inflation and things like that, it's just the cost of materials. It's just things that were affordable 5, 10 years ago aren't as affordable. I remember originally when we came out of the coming out of the pandemic, dealing with electrical wiring and couldn't get it because it was, scarce and getting it shipped over and things like that. So the scarcity of resources made it tough, having labor to be able to do that. So the housing affordability kind of trickled down into building permitting because we weren't getting as many permits at that time, because just due to those issues. And so people kind of understanding what that is. And, some people also looking at it a different way. For housing affordability, maybe how much square footage do you need to live in? Some people are looking at tiny houses or accessory dwelling units as ways to live now. Or, your parents in different ages of life may say, hey, I don't need a 3,000 square foot house. I can live in a 1,500 square foot accessory dwelling to my son, or daughter, and things like that. And so being able to look at housing affordability is not just, okay, let's make this house cheaper, but potentially a ways of looking at density, looking at different areas where people can live that is already kind of settled. We're not disturbing new earth to create new properties, but redeveloping an urban infill in existing properties.
Yeah, and that naturally has the housing affordability topic naturally has a strong tie to resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
If with good codes and building officials and the design teams and construction teams building and designing and constructing the up to higher standards of resilience, I mean, it certainly does make housing more affordable. There's not as much turnover on buildings, right? So there's a very strong tie to what you guys do.
Yeah, and that concern sometimes comes from, the initial upfront cost may be higher because yes, you're having to build it on piers. You may have to build it more of a more sturdy material or a thicker material or things like that. But in the long run, the cost of the structure will, as you mentioned, is affordable because you're not having to make those repairs every time. You're not worried about your roof blowing off because you got hurricane clips. You got those windows that are hurricane resistant, so you're not having to replace those all the time or put boards up to hope they survive as you go through. And so that does lend towards the affordability component as well.
Yeah, you mentioned hurricanes again. It just reminded me we stayed through Hurricane Sally when it came through our area, and that was one that was actually not really projected to come to us. It took a late turn before landfall. And my wife informed me after that we would never stay through another hurricane, and it just kind of hovered over the top of us. And it was a very interesting experience that you're just not prepared for like a storm that hour after hour all night long is just continuing to dump thunderstorm showers on you and
Mm-hmm.
the impact that it has. So yeah, my heart always goes out to people who are experiencing that, and I'm thankful that we have building code and we have requirements and policies in place to help protect people in their dwelling in these events. So let's talk about the importance of the building official. You mentioned digital transformation and having to move to that digital option during the pandemic. It kind of accelerated some of those things. So I know that a lot of people are have adopted BIM and virtual design and construction. So let's talk a little bit about the important role that the building official plays and how things are happening in building official offices and amongst building officials that are helping to facilitate move that forward.
So, in the Southeast is primarily, I can speak for Georgia and Florida primarily, but just understanding these new technologies and how they can be integrated. Some of them can be on a volunteer basis. Some staffs have the funding and have the ability to be able to adopt new technologies and do things like that. And that's definitely a great situation. You have other jurisdictions that aren't. So it's trying to figure out, hey, you want to leverage that technology. Public government, we're always told to do more with less, and understanding the limited staff we have, and try to do as much as we can with the staff we have. So being able to implement the technology is one part, but being able to constantly keep up with that technology is also just as important. It's like we put it in, and 2 years later, now it's like, hey, there may be a new statute that has changed, there may be a new rule that has changed, and our the state of Florida with us, every 3 years we receive a new edition of the Florida Building Code, and then that gives us new statutes, new requirements that we must follow. So then, how does that then trickle back down to our process? And if you're totally digital, if you're doing it on paper, that's great because it's like, hey, this is the process, and we move on. But if it's digital, now you've got to work with your IT department. You've got to work with all the other stakeholders to make sure the permitting process still acts the way it should. For us, it's just trying to be as consistent as we can. I tell people my story is like, hey, if you come here, I want it to be like Burger King. Now, because every building is different. Great, you may want add cheese, you may add pickles, you may want it cut in half, you may want the mayo on the side. That's great. But every time it comes in, it's a burger, and every time it should leave, it's a burger. So for us,
Yeah,
it's like trying to make sure we're providing you that consistent level of service every time you come in to see us.
very good analogy. So you made me aware. I didn't know this before we talked previously, that there's like coordination across authorities, like across the state, and there's maybe like a conference for building officials that come together and are working on this. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I'm a part of the Building Official Association of Florida. So that is over 600 building professionals across the state. Actually, I think that wrong number is wrong. I have to get you the correct number on that one. But there's a lot of building officials and permit techs and plan reviews and inspectors that are across the state. We meet at least once a year. We have separate committees, similar how NIBS has separate committees. We have our legislative committees. We have our jurisdiction committees, our code interpretation committees. So we have all these different committees because, once again, we want to be as consistent as we can. If you pull a permit down in Fort Lauderdale, you should assume that you pull a permit in Tampa and you get the same or similar comments. There may be something different in zoning and things like that, but you should
Sure.
generally get the same comments. Or if I pull something here, it should be the same as in Jacksonville or in Tallahassee. So what we try to do is we try to meet on that yearly basis, and then I meet. We coordinate with our groups in Tampa Bay. So I meet with the building official over in St. Pete, and I meet with the building official in Pasco, and we have conversations to say, hey, this is a new rule. How are you guys interpreting this? Or we've seen, A2L refrigerants come in, and now how are you guys looking at the refrigerant requirements? And really getting sometimes into the weeds there to make sure we're being as consistent as we can, because we love hearing that from the contractors. Oh, well, I went over to St. Pete and Tampa's doing it this way. Or I go over to Tampa and they say, oh, well, St. Pete's doing it. I'm like, we know each other. Like, I can just pick up the phone here and call them and say, hey, how are you really handling this? So it's very interesting, the questions that sometimes we get asked, and it's like, well, no, I've coordinated with the county, even between the city and the county, there may be discrepancies. And just
Yeah.
making sure, John Barrios was the previous building official here. Now he's the building official in Hillsborough County. I talk to him, at least once a month. So it's like, hey, I know what's going on there. He knows what's going on here. So there's no there's no playing
Right.
sides and things like that. So we try
Right.
to be as consistent as we can, but really just that BOAF and those groups just really give us the opportunity for the communication to be able to talk and share information.
Yeah, from an outsider's view to that process, would not have realized there's that much collaboration that happens and that's that much communication. But it certainly makes sense to be able to, provide consistent service and yeah to the public. That's fantastic. So and what I'm hearing from you is, you guys are like moving into digital technologies and transformation, but it's not just about adopting technologies; that it is tying to better code review or more efficient processes, or things that you guys are doing as building officials and what your departments are doing. You're trying to enhance those things and using technology to enhance them, not just adopting technology for technology's sake. So yeah, go ahead.
Correct. So we have two of the new technologies we just released in the last 60 days. We have one is a text to inspect. So if somebody's coming in and wants to do an inspection, could you come onto the computer and log in? But ideally, that GC, that contractor, he's out on the site. He's not in front of a computer. He doesn't have time. But what everybody does have is a cell phone. So he can text his inspection, schedule his inspection right from his phone. He can also then get the results of that right on his phone once the inspection is complete. So then he knows, hey, I can go ahead and start running that drywall because now that framing inspection is complete. I know that I'm good to go. I don't have to, call back into the office and find out that information. And so that's on the more technical side. And then on the more dealing with our homeowners, because everyone wants to improve their own property. They want to know, hey, what do I need for a permit? They don't deal with us on a daily basis. So ideally trying to find a tool or find a way to reach out to them. So our permit nav allows homeowners to just kind of play around. It's kind of like their sandbox. They say, hey, I want to do a driveway addition. Okay, well, you want to add a driveway, or you want to do a pool enclosure. Okay, great. Well, we'll walk you through the steps. It's kind of an algorithm that if this, then that. We ask you certain questions, and based off of your answers, tells you, okay, well, this is the permit you need to get. So then people aren't pulling the wrong permits. People aren't confused. We're not, our staff's going out there for a pool permit and they meant to do a driveway permit. We get all kinds of things like that. So to try to simplify that on the homeowner is definitely important, because if we make that complicated as they can, they're going to choose to not get a permit.
Yeah.
So then we're dealing with them on the code enforcement side to make them come into code compliance that way. So we prefer at least to try to make it as simple as it can on the front end to kind of encourage compliance.
Yeah, those sound like great tools. I know a lot of people on the construction side, a lot of construction companies are moving more to a connected job site where they're using technologies and, adding that piece, that functionality to connect with your office that's just incredible. That's great. And I love it from the owner side as well. I mean, that's, any of us who've had to go through that for our own homes, we work through some of those processes, can know that they can be sometimes long and hard to navigate. So that's just great. I love to see the technology being harnessed to make things more efficient and improve it for, not only you guys, but also the public and the way that others are interacting with you. So JC, what do you see as some of the challenges as we're embarking on, the digital transformation and all the things that are happening? What do you see are some of the challenges and maybe some opportunities and solutions related to those?
So challenges I see is just, building code and building code adoption, just because new technologies come out all the time. And how do you adapt those to the building code? Are those code equivalent? Are they code compliant? Do they meet alternatives? Are they IAS certified? Do they have a UL listing? How do those things tie in? I think climate change is real. We deal with it here. Our bay rises. We have a rising sea level. We have stronger hurricanes. Just statistically, we just have stronger hurricanes that are coming through now, and increased heat. So then, therefore, your systems, your AC systems in your offices have to work harder now because the temperature outside is hotter. So just dealing with those things in the climate change in regarding to building, and as we mentioned before, it's just a concern of the building safety industry just getting older. Going back to that future of buildings report, that 80% of that workforce is going to retire in 15 years. And where are we with that? How are those things being addressed? How are we being able to backfill? We're not losing all that institutional knowledge about some of these projects. The means to address those, it's just for the building code, it's just making sure all groups are at the table. As we're developing new code cycles every 3 years, we're in a new code cycle. So understanding that, making sure not only are the governmental officials there, me as the end user, but the contractors, the vendors, the manufacturers, the producers, and other standards groups, to make sure that all of those things are working together. You don't want to be leaning one way or the other. You want to be as fair as you can, or at least equitable as you can, so everyone has an opportunity to speak on it. For climate change, it's just, being aware, so that's half the battle. Sometimes it's just understanding that this is the danger that this specific property has, and you need to mitigate this by doing X, Y, and Z, not just X and Y, but X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And, so I think those things, and the agent of the workforce is, back to my comments of just trying to raise the profile. Like you said, the first time kind of having a building official on here. I've talked to other podcasts and they're like, hey, we've never had a building official on. And I'm like, I'm fine. I when I was in Georgia, I used to go to the planners conference, APA, when they had it in Savannah. They were like, what is a building official doing? It's like, no, just being exposed to these other groups. You get to hear these other perspectives. You get to understand what the mission of those separate groups are. And being able to be aware of some of those things sometimes makes you better in your decision making, because you're aware and understanding those different perspectives.
Yeah, I guess to some, the building officials might be a mysterious character, right? So it's good that you're getting out there and engaging with them. I think it's also great that you talked about like the contractors, construction, and those being part of the conversation, because obviously it's to their benefit to understand what is coming, have a good understanding of the requirements. So yeah, I really appreciate you and your approach of reaching across, outside of your department and outside of your immediate office to help bridge some of those gaps that exist amongst different stakeholders. That's fantastic. Well, I always like to look at emerging technologies as well, and through the eyes of the building official, what are you seeing, and what are you excited about with emerging technologies and how they may benefit the industry?
I know the trend right now is AI, so everything is AI this, AI that. But I think that's really a place to be able to find efficiencies on the construction side, to being able to be more productive, quality product tools using AI. On the design side, as more groups start to develop BIM and understand BIM and use those design guidelines, but then also understanding that some of those remedial tasks that you go through BIM, man, I've got to draw this duct connection here, 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 and here. Maybe the AI can help me
Yeah,
replicate that, so I don't have to get into so many repetitive tasks. Or using the AI to be able to kind of expand that. Hey, wasn't quite sure my supports would work. Is there a way to maybe expand that footing, and it may be bigger or smaller to help your building or reduce cost and things like that, to be able to use the AI to help there. On my end as a building official, for us, it's more trying to do more with less, be as efficient as we can in our building process. And if I'm able to use AI to modulate sections of the building code, so then therefore when that architect or engineer submits a set of plans, they get instant comments understanding, hey, these are the things you need to meet, whether if your height and area is not correct, your amount of openings, your distance to your property line, your any of those smaller things that staff could now be spending on more complex issues, as opposed to I've got to go back and respond to this, not necessarily, fairly simple issue that AI could help us with. So being able
yeah.
to streamline that and I really think it'd be a benefit to all. So like I said, AI is the trendy word right now, and trying to find out which products are legit and which products, really can help benefit our processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, and we do have a tendency in our industry to chase shiny objects, but yeah, I like that. I like the idea and the concept of, okay, this technology is here. We're going to embrace it. We're going to embrace it in a way that it improves our business processes or our procedures, ultimately for for the good of the industry, for the good of the public. So really appreciate your perspective. You certainly have quite a unique perspective, and thank you for sharing it with us today. We always like to add a little bonus question. JC, this is one of my favorite parts of the podcast. We like to have our guest share something with us about them that's probably a little known fact, or what would you like to share with us today?
A little known fact: I am a huge wrestling fan. Not wrestling, wrestling fan. My grandmother kind of got me hooked in it. She used to take me to the matches, the local fights, the local
Oh yeah,
wrestlers, and we used to watch it on TV all the time. So I just kind of carried it with me, even to the point where WrestleMania 28, that was 2012, I ended up basing my whole bachelor party to make sure I could go to Miami, also catch WrestleMania, and still have a good time. So
wow.
I am a big wrestling buff. So I love wrestling, and it's funny. My kids totally checked out, don't care about it at all, and so I still have a few friends I reach out to, and we make that trip yearly to go catch WrestleMania and things like that.
Yeah, I'm probably an older generation wrestling fan. I was back before there was things like WrestleMania. I don't remember anything like that. I do remember going like to the Dothan Civic Center and seeing like Ric Flair, and
Yes,
it
yes.
was way back, way back. I'm aging myself now, but yeah, that's I'll leave that alone right there. So yeah, that is an interesting little known fact about you. That is great. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, I'll be looking for you on the top turnbuckle somewhere in the future. But yeah, that's great. I love it. So what's next for you, JC?
What's really been interesting that I was just appointed to the ICC board of directors, so that was just a few weeks ago. Really excited about this new opportunity with the ICC, becoming a bigger ambassador for the organization. To have that opportunity to be able to focus on building safety and how that can be improved, and what ICC's role is in that. So I think that's, especially coming on the 30th anniversary here of ICC. I think that's just really cool to be recognized by the board of directors to be able to help and come in and fill that role. So that's really my next thing. Literally 2 weeks next, it literally just happened. So really just trying to absorb all of that. It's kind of drinking from a fire hose, understanding the role of a board of director member. And obviously I did this, last year with NIBS, trying to understand the role of the board as well. So, it's just that it's going to be interesting and fun because it is something, I've wanted to do for a while. The opportunity presented itself and here we are.
Well, congratulations. That is another huge aspect of your career. That's fantastic. Yeah. I don't know. You've probably got more time in the day than other people. That's taking on a lot of responsibility, but nobody better for the job, JC. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for the work you do at NIBS and the work you do through our councils and how you're an advocate for that. And I would encourage our audience, this conversation is just a reminder that there's a lot of different ways that folks can get involved in NIBS, and really you can come and be with other people, network with other people in the industry, learn a lot, share your own knowledge. That's one of the main things that NIBS does, is that we convene experts from around the nation here and even beyond. So very excited about that. Please consider joining and becoming a part of those activities, help move the industry forward. And you've hit on some very important topics, JC. You talked about housing affordability. You talked about the perspective from the building official and these advances in digital technology. I mean, I guess the favorite takeaway I have is that, you guys are using digital technologies and looking at digital transformation with a real purpose. And maybe that's the lesson for our audience today, is that it's, again, not looking to adopt technology just for the sake of having the latest, greatest thing or following a trend. It's how can we really utilize these tools to make our processes better and produce, a better service or a better outcome for the public. And I really appreciate that perspective.
No problem.
So anything else you'd like to add to our audience before we close out today?
No, I just, I appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, just being able to talk, like you said, kind of across different shareholders, different groups that I don't normally get to see or touch. But yes, building officials necessarily get a bad rap because we're usually telling people information they don't want to hear. But yeah. It's truly for public safety. We don't necessarily get the same information as a police officer or a fire firefighter, but our job is just as important because you go to bed at night, you plug in your charger, you're not electrocuting yourself. You go take a shower, the water's not scalding you. So there was somebody who had to make sure that water was regulated at that temperature, to make sure that circuit was properly grounded. So ideally for us, we're that unsung hero. And so it is good being that unsung hero, but sometimes it's good to kind of promote the things we are doing and people understand that is a part of safety, is building safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for everything you do. And again, it's just a model example too of how you reach across different lines and engage other stakeholders. And I think anytime we can do that, we really have an opportunity to advance the industry and advance society, beyond our own direct initiatives or responsibilities. So thank you, folks, for tuning in today to Building Innovation, the podcast. Special thanks to JC Hudgison for joining us and sharing his expertise and his knowledge and perspective. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever podcasts are available, and be sure to check us out on the NIBS YouTube channel for more great content. We encourage you to like and share the video and the audio versions of this podcast. Engage more of the industry, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.